Hey guys, I've got some fascinating positions to show you, but before we jump in and look at these, including the one that you see on the screen, we're going to do a little bit of a warm-up with a couple of mate and twos, which usually aren't too bad, but I think these might give you guys a little bit more of a difficult time. Let's go. All right, here's the first position. It's white to play and checkmate in 2 moves. Before I say anything about the position, if you'd like to pause and think through what's the solution, go ahead and do that now. And if you had a chance to do that, let's talk about what's going on. Okay, so when you first look at this position, it's like, oh, we have a queen, we have a rook, we have a knight. Surely there must be an easy way to checkmate black's king. But it turns out that black's pretty well defended and we don't have like a clear path to checkmate. And so it turns out that one of the major checkmating ideas in this position is moving the rook to b8. And the only way that the rook can get to b8 is if this pawn captures something, which might lead you to the solution of queen to c6. This is the only way to checkmate in 2 moves. And the point, like I mentioned, is that black can't take the queen, because if they take the queen, our rook's coming down, checkmate. So if they can't take the queen, what do they have to do? Well, that's kind of black's problem. They don't have any good moves. This is a Zugzwang. The king can't move, because the knight's stopping it. The bishop doesn't want to take this knight because then there's nothing protecting this pawn, and we have checkmate here. So that's another idea behind moving the queen to c6. We're also kind of threatening this if the bishop leaves. There's also this pawn over here and this pawn here that we haven't talked about yet. So if this pawn captures, well, then we've got queen takes c8 checkmate. If this pawn captures, we've got queen a4 checkmate. And so notice how we have so many different types of checkmates, right? And then there's also, let's see, I think there's one more idea. Yeah, a5 or a6. And we have this amazing checkmate idea. The pawn is actually pinned, and so it can't take the rook. And then, of course, the knight's controlling here. So, I mean, that's 1 checkmate. We had the checkmate here was 2. The checkmate here was 3, 4. Did I miss any other ones? I think 4 or 5 different types of checkmate. So pretty interesting position. And here's another one for you. So again, it's white to play and checkmate black in 2 moves, and the solution might not be readily apparent, but if you'd like, go ahead and pause and think through what should white play here. All right, if you had a chance to do that for this one, when you first kind of start looking around, the only checks that immediately kind of jump out at you are probably queen e3 check. And then, of course, black can just block, and we don't really have checkmate the next move, so that doesn't make sense. We also have this knight check, but if the rook takes it, then we don't really have a follow-up. The only move that wins for white in 2 moves is actually the amazing queen to d5 check. We're giving black the option of capturing 1, 2, 3 different ways, and all of them lead to mate. So if the king takes, we've got rook here, checkmate, because the pieces are just stopping black from moving back, which is kind of funny. If the rook takes, then the knight can come in, and we have this cool little checkmate with the knight. And then, of course, if the bishop takes, we have knight takes d3, because now the rook is blocked. And again, it's a very nice looking mate. So congratulations if you saw queen to d5. Not an easy move to find by any means, but pretty cool situation to be in, where you have 3 different checkmates to follow it up. All right, so hopefully you've got a little bit of a warm-up and now you're ready to tackle these other 3 positions. So first of all, this position right here, it looks pretty straightforward. It's white to play and win. And before I say anything, I'm going to go ahead and let you pause and think through, what do you think the solution is? What should white play in this position? All right, and if you had a chance to do that, let's talk about what's going on. So first of all, white obviously has the pass pawn over here. Black has the pass pawn here. And if you're like me, the first thing that you thought about when you looked at this position was, well, what happens if I push the pawn, right? Because that's kind of the most obvious move. So b4, g5, b5, g4, b6, g3, b7, g2. We get the queen. Black gets the queen. And this position is totally a draw. Just, there's no way either side can win unless somebody just blunders the queen, right? So you might be wondering, well, hold on a second, how do we make progress? Because if we try to move our king, well, black's just going to move their king, and they're still going to be able to push their pawn, right? Even if we kind of try to come up here, the king's still going to come up, right? And eventually, you know, we can't really stop black. So what could the idea be? Well, the move that we need to play is king to e2, not king to f2, because on king to f2, like I said, the king actually was going to go there and it's going to support the pawn, and the pawn would be putting us in check when it got here and just get a queen. But on e2, things are a little bit different. So the first point is that if black tries to push the pawn, well, then we're going to come up here, and now we're actually going to win black's pawn, right? Because black's king isn't close enough. We're going to take the pawn. So what does that mean? That means black needs to actually make a king move. Now, they don't want to move here or here because they're blocking the pawn, which means only move that really makes sense for black is king to h2. And now, if you want to pause again and think through what's the solution now? Well, if you had a chance to do that, now that we've added this move and this move, now we start pushing the pawn. And you can see that now the king is lined up with our queening square. So what does that mean? Well, it means that when we go through the exact same line, last time, remember, we got the queen first, but then black got the queen next move and put us in check. This time, we get the queen first, puts black in check, and black isn't in time to get their queen. So, and of course, you know, you might say, well, black still has the pawn. Can't they get a queen and still get a draw? Well, the answer is no. And actually, this is one of the pawns. When you have a queen and a king against a king and a pawn, the knight pawns and the two center pawns are, generally speaking, wins for the side with the queen, okay? And the ones that are rook pawns and bishop pawns are, generally speaking, a draw. The player with the pawn can actually get a draw. It has to do with the fact that there are little stalemate traps. Now, also, another thing to keep in mind, in this position, white's king is so close that I believe even if it was a different pawn, white would probably still have winning chances because you can set up like a checkmate with your king and queen. But when the king's farther away and it's a king and a pawn, then the rook and bishop pawns are draws. Hopefully that made sense. If not, we'll talk about that more in a future video, and I think I've actually already talked about it on the channel. But anyway, the point is, this is a win. For example, if the king goes here, let's see, queen h8 check forces black's king to go in front of the pawn, and then white can simply play king f3, and it's actually mate next move over here. Okay, so really nice position. Hope you enjoyed that. Let's go ahead and jump to the next one. All right, here's the next position. Again, it's white to play and win, and if you'd like to pause and think through what should white's plan be, go ahead and do that, and then we'll talk about the solution. All right, well, if you had a chance to do that, basically what's going on here is white would like to keep both of these pawns alive and capture black's pawn, and then the end game is a win. If white loses one of these pawns, then most likely black's going to be able to simply sacrifice the bishop for the other pawn, and even if white takes this, which it looks like white is going to, white's not going to be able to win with the knight. So for example, if black just simply captures the pawn, black's going to play king to b5. This pawn is now a goner. We can't save it with our knight anyway, and if we push it, it's gone. And of course, black can just sacrifice this bishop for this pawn whenever we try to push it, and the game's a draw. Okay, so that's what we want to avoid. And so the starting move to this position is knight to d4 check. And what we're doing is saying, okay, where's the king going to move? Because it really wanted to go to b5 and get our pawn. We're preventing that. And so now black has to make a decision. So king to c5 attacks our knight. And it's kind of threatening still if we, let's just say, move the knight away somewhere. Eventually black's going to be able to come over here and get our pawn. They'll want to save the bishop first in this case, but then next move this is going to happen, and we kind of have the same problem. So this is really, after king c5, this is really the key position to this study. How do we make progress as white, knowing what black is trying to do? So if you want to pause again and think through that now, I'll let you do that. All right, well, if you had a chance to look at that, the only move that white can play here to win this position is the mind-boggling king to h1. And essentially what we're doing, it's another example of Zugzwang. We're saying, okay, what are you going to do if you're black? And the answer is, well, you can't move your pawn because we just blocked it. You can't take the knight because if you take the knight, we actually just play a6 and that pawn is gone. Because the king's too far, right? The king can't get into the box, right? This is the box. The king can't enter it, so we know the king can't catch it. And the bishop would like to be able to move here and stop it, but it can't. Our pawn is there, and even if it could, the king is blocking it, so it doesn't matter. It's gone, right? So taking the knight Not an option. And what about going here, here, here to try to get the pawn? Well, all those squares are covered. So the only place the king could go to try to stop the pawn would be like here. But then we fork the king and the bishop. So that's not an option. So where else can the king move? I mean, if it moves here, the pawn is gone again, right? If it moves anywhere else, same thing, the pawn is gone. And if black, let's just say, tries to move the bishop somewhere, let's take a look at where can the bishop move. Here. Oh, look at that. There's a knight fork. Okay, what about here? Sorry, here. Oh, look at that. There's another knight fork. What about here? Oh, look at the same knight fork. What about here? A knight fork. Here, pawn. Here, a knight fork. And here, a knight fork. Is that not amazing? Like, this is a threat to control these squares. This is a threat to control these squares. And to control these squares. And so all of the bishop's squares are controlled. I mean, you gotta love chess, right? You gotta love chess. So black has no moves. There's just no moves. Either they move the bishop and lose the bishop, they take the knight and white gets a queen, or they move the king somewhere and white gets a queen. Just like that. Wow. All right, one more position. Okay, this position is also white to play and win. Before I say anything, if you'd like to pause and think through what do you think the idea is, keep in mind these pawns are going this way, and of course black's going this way. All right, go ahead and do that if you like, and then we'll talk about the solution. All right, so if you had a chance to look at that and you're ready to see the solution, you might have thought that, well, wait a second, can't we just play d7, which, by the way, is the first move, and aren't we just going to move our king and win the game? Like, let's just say king takes here, we just slide our king over, the rook has to move, we get a queen, right? Or if the rook takes, we're fine because we have an extra pawn and the black can't get to. That's good observation. The problem is this move right here. Black plays the surprisingly tricky rook to f4. And here's the point. Here's the point now. If we move our king over, black's going to take our pawn. And yes, we can get a queen. But if we do, black simply takes it, and then they take here. And this is going to be a draw, okay? So we could also try, instead of getting the queen right away, we could try pushing this pawn, right? Because now we're kind of have two threats. How's the rook going to stop both of them? Well, the answer is rook to c4 check. We don't want to go this way with our king because we lose this pawn. So we want to go this way. And now black plays the crazy move, rook to b4. And this is kind of a good moment if you would like to pause. What's the idea behind black playing rook to b4? Why are they letting us get a queen? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, the reason is after we get a queen, they're going to take here with check. And it doesn't really matter where we move our king to. They're going to play the move rook to b8 check. And after we take it, guess what? We just stalemated black. There's no moves for black. Same thing if we would have moved our king over here. Black's going to play check. Doesn't matter how we take. We take with the queen this time. Again, stalemating black, okay? Really amazing trick, right? So that's black's idea. So going back here, we see now it's not so simple, right? After rook f4, it's not so simple. So what do we need to play? The move is d5. And you might say, what does that accomplish? Black's still going to go here. They're still threatening to take our pawn. How does that help us? Let me show you how. Now we play king c8 again. Of course, the rook takes the pawn. Again, we push the pawn, right? b7. Again, black puts us in check. Again, we go king b8. This is the exact same line we saw. But now you can see the difference. Remember last time the rook was here and it moved to b4 to create that little trick. Guess what? That's not an option because we just take the rook. We check. And then there's no more stalemate shenanigans. Black's king is free and we're getting a queen. So black can't do what they did before. So they have to go for a different try to come over here and stop the pawn like this. And now we have the really nice move, king to a8. We're giving up this pawn because we're going to get a queen. Actually, that's not true. Rook takes d7. We're not going to get a queen because if we get a queen, guess what? That's right. Rook to d8. And again, we have to take it. Our queen is pinned. Again, we stalemated black. So what do we do? I kind of gave it away, but what's the answer? That's right. If you said we'd promote this to a knight, you are correct. We don't get a queen, we get a knight, forking the pieces. And by the way, it's not over yet because the king's going to make a run for our pawn. So we take the rook with check, and here comes the king. It's going over. we're going check, it's coming down, we're going check, it's coming down, we're going check, and it goes here. Forks our knight and our pawn. So what are we going to do now? Well, we just abandon the knight, and our king makes a beeline for this pawn, and guess what? Our king is going to get there just in time to take the pawn, defend our pawn, and unfortunately for black, the king is not in a position to, blockade the pawn. If black's king was over here, this would be a draw. Or even if black's king was up here, they could, I believe that's still a draw. They can just keep mirroring it on our king and we could never escape. But they're too far, and there's one move behind. We go here, we get a queen, and we win. Amazing stuff, right? Like, how many different stalemate traps did we see? Only way to win was to promote to a knight with the fork. I mean, this is why chess is like so cool, right? So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, maybe learned a thing or two as well. And if you're wondering what to do next, go watch this video where I show you knight deflection tactics. It's pretty amazing stuff. I did it a few months back, but it's a really good video. You're gonna like that if you like this one. So go check that out. But as always, thanks for watching. Stay sharp, play smart, and take care.